Thank you very much for that very kind introduction, and thank you for this extraordinarily kind invitation to be in Honduras, in this beautiful country, and at this very important seminar. And I want to congratulate the Attorney General for bringing us together and hosting us, also for the wonderful remarks of the President of the Congress and of the Attorney General explaining the context that Honduras finds itself in, but it's a context that most of the world finds itself in. The question of achieving sustainable development and securing safety and sovereignty is a challenge faced all over the world, not only in this country. And it is a central challenge for Honduras, and I want to offer some reflections on your very valiant efforts to build sovereignty and build a strategy of sustainable development. First, while it may seem paradoxical, maybe Donald Trump will help. He believes in sovereignty. He says so almost every day. We just need to remind him what it means. So it's sovereignty not only for the United States, but sovereignty for Honduras and for other countries as well. He made a speech at the United Nations in 2017. I happened to be there when he made that speech. And he said, and I quote, "The future belongs to sovereign and independent nations who protect their citizens, respect their neighbors, and honor differences that make each country special and unique." So if those words are applied in practice, we're in pretty good shape. And I think that this is really one of the main purposes of this workshop and this seminar and reflection. Honduras needs and it wants foreign investors, but it does not want foreign invaders. It does not want people taking over the sovereign territory or the sovereign rights of this country. That's not a lot to ask, by the way, and it's also within reach. It's a matter of establishing some clear understanding and some clear principles. Yes to foreign investment, but for foreign investors that obey the law, respect sovereignty, follow the government's regulations, pay their taxes, and behave appropriately without meddling in internal politics, without playing games to try to bring other powers to bear on this country. That kind of foreign investment Honduras wants and needs, and I'll come back to that later. It's not exactly the kind of foreign investment that historically has characterized this region. This region has been characterized by foreign investors who are abusive, authoritarian, tied to the power of the United States or to other major powers, and who have for actually not just the last 10 or 20 years, but more than 100 years, abused their privileges of being within a foreign country and use that country as a base for illegal operations or to bring to bear brute power on their behalf. I don't have to belabor the point. That's the history of this country, and it's the history of the neighbors of Honduras. Central America has been absolutely put in turmoil repeated times by foreign companies that have friends in Washington. And this is a problem that goes back a very long way. I think it's worth saying that it goes back to the start of modern capitalism itself, because the pattern of foreign investors operating as sovereigns is a characteristic of Anglo-Saxon imperialism of more than 4 centuries. The British, I think, invented it, although maybe the Dutch also deserve co-inventor claims, because it was basically in the year 1600 and 1602 that the East India Company was established in Britain and in the Netherlands. And those companies were not only money-making ventures, they were organized as colonial entities to take over the sovereignty of places, especially in East Asia. The East India Company, a company supposedly, a joint stock company, ended up owning and controlling the Indian subcontinent until finally in 1857, the British government took over from the East India Company that claim of power. But the East India Company was the private entity that deployed armies and deployed foreign policy means, bribery, treachery, murder, and other means in order to conquer an entire subcontinent. Indonesia did no better, although on a smaller scale, by controlling Java and controlling other parts of today's Indonesia. And again, quite remarkably, these were private companies, not the British government, for example, or the Dutch government, but of course they operated backed by the power of the state. And so they were militarized entities that had the backing of the monarchy, or in the case of Britain, or the Dutch Republic in the case of the Indonesian or the Dutch East India Company. So the story we're talking about goes back a very long way. There are wonderful recent histories, by the way, for those who are interested. A book called Empire Incorporated, I would strongly recommend, which describes how the British Empire was basically a series of joint stock companies that acted as sovereign or in the name of the sovereign. And this is the East India Company, the Company of Muscovy, the Africa Company, the Virginia Company, the Hudson Bay Company. These are companies that ruled. So what you're seeing and experiencing is something that is in the deep mindset of the Anglo-Saxon world. And one thing to remember about the United States, everything the US knows it learned from Britain. So this is basically a continuation of British principles that go back many centuries. The Spanish conquerors, I think, were no more kind, but they didn't do it through joint stock companies. They did it through explicit territorial claims, and then, as you know better than I, giving certain land rights to nobles and others. But it was the British who masterminded the idea of private companies becoming sovereign as colonial powers in all parts of the world, including this part of the world. Unfortunately, the Western Hemisphere has a long history of this, which I won't belabor, but the United States has long viewed the Caribbean and Central America as its playground for operations, and for a very long time has given the power to private companies closely allied with Washington power. This country has been invaded so many times by the United States, or intervened so many times by the United States in its history, including its recent history, that we don't really need to detail the point further. But again, you know perfectly well that powerful companies, typically tied to powerful Washington law firms like Sullivan and Cromwell, which in turn have been tied to powerful individuals like the Dulles brothers, one running the State Department, one running the CIA, had free reign in this region, overthrowing presidents, overthrowing governments, intervening as they see fit. And it's a very deep mindset, and it's not a mindset that is gone, unfortunately, by any means. So we're all recognizing these realities. Unfortunately, the Caribbean Basin is really viewed as an easy pickings for the wealthiest and most powerful Americans, for their tax evasion, for their illicit operations, for whatever other things go on. Perhaps the most notable in the news is Little St. James Island and Mr. Epstein, but the idea of an island as a private preserve of power is all through this region, and it's makes things quite difficult. So what has happened on Roatan Island is not so different from any of the past history. The idea that an island in this region could become the sovereign control of a few powerful, rich people in the United States is pretty much par for the course. But this is really what we're grappling with. Of course, this is not what economic development is. This is just extraction, and there's a difference. Extraction is taking your resources or using your resources for illicit or nefarious or very narrow interest purposes. Development is the broad-based improvement of the population of a country. Sustainable development is to do that in a way which also respects the very fragile and very wondrous ecosystem of the country, and you have one of the most beautiful countries and fragile ecosystems, and ecosystems that are under threat, both in the terrestrial and the marine ecosystems, under threat both by extractive abuse and also by global trends of climate change and mega pollution. So the challenge of sustainable development is very, indeed, very difficult under any circumstances, but even more difficult under your circumstances. So what to do? Well, I don't want to give glib answers to what I already said is a challenge that is quite deep and long-standing. And there are no easy answers, but you're being very valiant, clear, determined, and proper in what you are saying and doing and legislating and pursuing in public diplomacy. So I want to say, first of all, that I give this government all of the accolades for its actions. They are in support of the people of Honduras. They are in the support of solid principles. They are in support of sustainable development. This is not some noxious, radical ideology. What this is combating abuse. This is combating impunity. This is combating a long-held system of power which does not lead to sustainable development, but leads to mass inequality and injustice. And so what the government is doing deserves our full support in every way: intellectual, conceptual, diplomatic, practical, day by day. And also to help President Trump understand that he's right about sovereignty, and he should apply those principles justly and fully including in defending Honduras' sovereignty. This is extremely important. So what practically to do? I think the government is doing the two things that are very important and must be pursued simultaneously. One is to say that this country wants foreign investors. It needs foreign investors. A relatively poor country of 10 million people cannot achieve prosperity without being well integrated into the international economy. This is clear. And foreign investors, when they are behaved, when they operate according to the law, when they actually bring capital and technology, raise living standards, create jobs, create new exports, create tax revenues, and thereby contribute to the sustainable development of a country. So the government should absolutely continue to go out of its way to say this is not an attack on the concept or the practice of foreign investment. It is actually to make foreign investment work for the investors, because investors that come to abuse aren't actually going to get very far, and for the benefit of Honduras. Foreign direct investment has to be a mutual benefit for the investors and for your. So this is, I think, the first point. The second point is that Honduras, like most of the world, is caught up in an absolutely failed system of arbitral claims made by foreign investors that are an instrument of impunity. And this is therefore a matter both of tactics and strategy for this country. Decades ago, the idea emerged that for a country to attract foreign investment, it has to tie its own hands in a way to convince those foreign investors that it won't wreck the deal that brings the foreign investors into the country in the first place. In other words, to be a responsible host country, the government has to say, you can come in and then we won't expropriate your assets at will afterwards. And so the idea developed that the way that a government can do that is to say, we put our sovereignty under limits by enabling investors to defend their claims, to defend their rights. That was the idea that originally started this arbitration process that is now based at the World Bank at ICSID, and based at the UN in UNCITRAL, and based at the International Chamber of Commerce, and in other venues. There was an idea there. Like many ideas, it was a very incomplete and flawed idea, because the idea was manipulated. It was hacked. It was hacked in a number of ways. But the main way it was hacked was the claim by foreign investors that governments no longer have any power to diminish the profits that we might earn under any circumstances, and we will challenge any actions that governments take, no matter how legitimate, regarding taxation, environmental management, relations with communities, obeying the law, and so forth. And so this idea failed to understand or to acknowledge in the process that governments have ongoing responsibilities, that governance is never fixed and set, but that regulations, laws, taxes necessarily change over time, and all of us, whether we're workers or investors, understand that we live in a world in which public policy will change, and as long as the government is carrying out its public policy in a honest and constitutional and legal way, we absorb those changes. Sometimes my taxes go up, sometimes I face a new regulation, sometimes something else changes. That's completely normal. I don't have the right to sue Donald Trump because he changed the tax law last month. I don't like the law. They called it one big beautiful bill. I call it one big ugly monstrosity. And Elon Musk, who has a lot more followers than I do, said the same, by the way. But in any event, the point is, of course you live in a changing world, but this arbitral process failed to recognize that, because what it did was leave a completely blank slate in which three arbiters selected under ICSID or under UNCITRAL or other means can decide what they want, not guided by national law, by Honduras's constitution, or even by any clear juridical principles. By the way, everything I know about this, I know from my daughter Lisa, who's going to speak in the afternoon, and so she will correct me on everything by the time we get to the afternoon. But just to say that it is completely flawed at its core, the current processes, because the arbitration process in no way, absolutely in no way, is bound by national law, by constitutionalism, or even by the principles of enabling governments to carry out their just functions. The three arbiters serve on their own without any body of law governing them. They typically make a lot of money sitting there. It became a game. It became almost a gambling routine, because on Wall Street they raise money to make cases to sue Honduras and then bet their stakes on it. So it's a little bit like watching a blackjack game to see whether Honduras can be squeezed to pay some money that then these Wall Street lawyers and investors take home to their private islands in the Caribbean or to Southampton or wherever they're going to celebrate their winnings. In other words, the process that was created with an idea is completely broken. I don't mean broken a little bit. I mean broken completely. It's a disgrace. The World Bank is disgraceful for hosting this one more day. This is not serving anything about international development. This is a game of extortion. Honduras is being extorted, but not Honduras alone. It's wherever you can raise some funds, get some lawyers, put some arbiters on for maybe $1,000 a day per diem, have some fun, roll the dice, and see who wins. One of the abuses, by the way, that I find absolutely remarkable in its evil ingenuity is that the arbiters don't even limit their settlements to what was invested, but they say that the investor has the rights to all the profits that they would have earned as their lawyers prove it. And so even if the ground isn't even broken on a project, these arbiters are giving billions of dollars of settlements. Lisa and I were involved a bit in one of the most egregious examples of this in a case in Pakistan, where one of Pakistan's states, against Pakistan's own mining law, probably through corruption, had given a contract to a mining company. The mine was never developed. The original mining company sold its rights to another company that also didn't develop the mine. But what they did do was sue Pakistan for $11 billion, if I remember correctly, for a mine that didn't even exist, because they said that's what we would have made had we even broken the ground once. And the arbiters granted this. I can't imagine a more despicable, idiotic, absurd, abusive, extortionist practice than this. Am I being clear? Okay, so the question is what to do. My own view, again, I apologize. First, I'm not a lawyer. Second, I'm not in your situation, and I don't know all the facts. But I would not sit in one more of these arbitrations anywhere. And I would write to the president of the World Bank saying, it's a shame you host such an institution. I would write to the Secretary General of the United Nations, it is a shame that the UN, which is dedicated to sustainable development, hosts a process which is nothing but an abuse. And you can add a footnote, add my name and my email address. I'll be happy to speak with the President Banga or the Secretary General of the UN, because this needs to stop. And I would not enter into a tribunal. I would rather say, no, this is a process that is unacceptable. It's proven itself to be utterly hacked. It has become a game. It is an outrage, and we're not going to play it. At the same time, I would deal with these investors. Some of them are pure crooks. Some of them are your countrymen hiding under a foreign post office box, so they're not really foreign investors at all. Some of them are politically connected Hondurans, no doubt, that think that they can squeeze the state through some kind of extortion operation. Those I would suggest that they leave to some other island. And the ones that have some possible justification or some concern or really want to do business, I would say the following. First, we would welcome your legitimate business. Legitimate business means you actually bring capital here, that it is a legal operation, that it hires people, that it obeys the laws, that it operates as a normal company, that it pays the taxes due, that it doesn't suborn our politics, that it doesn't try to bribe politicians, that it doesn't hire Washington lobbying firms to extort us. If you fit those criteria and would like to be in Honduras to make business and make money, we welcome you. Now, on that basis, what is your real problem? Because you're not going to have sovereignty. Prospera is not going to be an independent country or an independent entity outside of Honduran law. It's ridiculous. By the way, that's another bad idea of a friend of mine, Paul Romer. Very smart guy, wonderful PhD dissertation that won the Nobel Prize in economics. But what a not for charter cities, for endogenous growth. But what a bad idea he had, because how easy it is to be abused and hacked, which is exactly what has happened. It was a bad idea from the start, by the way, very naive in my view, but a terrible idea in practice. In any event, I would be happy to try my hand at also explaining to Mr. Thiel or anybody else, you can't own this island, you can't have this island, this is not your sovereign territory, this is part of Honduras. You have to obey Honduran laws. If you're interested in investing, put up some money. You certainly have it. So to my mind, this is the dual strategy. Honduras does not want to have a reputation, and it doesn't have a reputation. and it should not be put into having a reputation as being abusive or against investment. This is ridiculous. This country wants and needs foreign investment, but it should have a reputation of being a law-based society. That's a great reputation to have, and one that is worth defending, and one that is, I think, possible to defend in this two-track approach. No to arbitral processes that need to be ended worldwide anyway, and yes to discussions with investors to see if there is some honest business that they would like to do in the country, in which case I'm sure that Honduras would be a wonderful host government. Of course, none of this is so easy for this country alone, because this is happening all over the world. And so it's also very useful to continue to build the global understanding, to build the reaction against the World Bank and the UN being hosts to this abusive process, because both institutions in their charter, in their mandate, are for sustainable development, not for extortion. And this is, I think, why you can build the alliances also over time for this. Let me finally say a word about this country's longer-term economic development, because I think that that's also quite important. There is one overwhelming, beyond all doubt, central needs for this country to achieve sustainable development, and that is to improve education in this country. The core of attracting the kinds of investment you want is higher educational attainment. And this is the most important investment that you can make. I do believe, by the way, that it is very useful for you, if I may say so, to benchmark Honduras against Costa Rica. Of course, that's a complicated comparison, but at the core, in my view, is that for many historical reasons, Costa Rica has achieved a high level of educational attainment and skills. And I happened to be involved a little bit in the late 1990s when President Jose Maria Figueres was president, and he was just bringing in Intel for the first time. And what has happened in Costa Rica is that there's actually come a cluster of technology companies really producing. It turned out, who would have guessed it, medical devices became a principal export for for Costa Rica, excuse me. Why? I don't really know, except it seems that one company, Baxter, decided to invest in Costa Rica because it had a skilled workforce and they thought they could make some product lines there. And from there developed a whole cluster of medical technologies and medical equipment and appliances. Quite amazing. And yes, they have special zones for this kind of manufacturing, and the income level in Costa Rica in nominal terms is about 5 times that of Honduras in per capita GDP. In purchasing power terms, maybe 3 times that of Honduras. No country is a strict benchmark for any others, but I like the Costa Rican example actually, because it shows that in your physical geography, a country actually even smaller than your market, it's only 5 million people, it's half the size actually in area as well as population, can develop new export clusters in the technology sector. But the key is the workforce. The key is not the tax legislation or anything else. The key is the skilled workforce. That's what brought in the first investors, and that's what will bring the investors anywhere in the world. So I just want to emphasize this point. Of course, there are many other things to do in development, and wisely you didn't ask me to elaborate on all of those today. But I would say that in a very quick moment, investing in skills and education is number one. Of course, sovereignty, peace, and security is number two. It's saying a lot, but it's important. Physical infrastructure is number three. I like the project of a rail going from the Atlantic to the Pacific. Just saying, it's been 100 years waiting. It's not a bad project, in my guess. I'd like to see the analytics, but I bet it would work for you. Connecting your power grid, your digital, your fiber, and so forth throughout Central America, it's already happening. More can be done. Fourth is regional integration. Very difficult. You've got a lot of very distinct politics and countries in this region. Yet, there is a lot of benefit of good relations with neighbors. A lot of benefit. As hard as it is, keep at it, because I think it's extremely important. And last, I like CELAC. CELAC barely exists. Honduras put it on the map. Colombia has it now. It is the community of Latin American and Caribbean states. It is only a shell of an organization now. It's not even an organization, it's a rotating presidency. But I think for the future, it's something very, very important for all of the countries of Latin America and the Caribbean, so I would encourage you to continue to pursue that. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.